Don't strike it again." Ismay Tarrant's voice cut across the memorial ground before the first note had finished dying over the wet October grass. The bell still trembled in its temporary oak frame beside St. Cuthbert's, its dark bronze surface catching the pale light of Monday, the 4th of October 1869, while masons stood idle around the unfinished tower and choir boys stared at her as though she had interrupted a prayer. Ismay had been preparing them for the response that would follow the test strike, one hand raised to shape their entrance, the other closed tightly around the blue-green sea glass, pebble concealed in her palm. She had heard the expected fundamental. Beneath it, however, another pulse had moved slowly and unevenly, gathering and fading like two breaths struggling inside one chest. It was wrong, not merely imperfect, dangerous. The bell-ringer looked down from the raised platform, his padded hammer still resting against the timber rail. "What did you say, Miss Tarrant?" "I said don't strike it again." Her words carried farther than she intended. The half-dozen workmen near the tower turned. Reverend Dr. Wilmot paused beside the lectern, prepared for the dedication rehearsal. At the edge of the grass, Lady Henrietta Kersey lowered her lorgnette with deliberate slowness. "The bell has been tested before," she said. Her mourning silk was grey rather than black, refined enough to announce grief without permitting it to disfigure her. "No doubt Miss Tarrant has mistaken an echo for catastrophe." Ismay kept her eyes on the bell. "It wasn't an echo." "Of course not," Lady Henrietta replied. "An echo would be too ordinary." Septimus Kersey stepped from beside the presentation table, where the ceremonial silver hammer lay inside a long red baize case. He was broad through the shoulders, carefully dressed, and already irritated by the delay. As Memorial Work Secretary, he had spent the summer reminding everyone that Lord Roland Davenant deserved magnificence. "The subscribers will arrive within the hour," he said. "We cannot postpone a proper test because a former singer dislikes the tone." Ismay felt the familiar tightening below her ribs. Former singer. He made the words sound like an accusation whispered behind a stage curtain. She opened her hand just enough to feel the smooth edge of the sea glass against her skin. Her mother had given it to her before her first solo at Scarborough, when Ismay had been 19, and still believed that a clear voice could protect its owner from being misunderstood. "I don't dislike the tone," she said. "I heard an uneven beat beneath it. Two close frequencies are fighting each other." Septimus smiled toward the workmen. There, a performance after all. Enough. The single word came from Anthony Davenant, 7th Duke of Haldon. He had been standing near the temporary rail, apart from his aunt and cousin, dressed in a black coat that made his stillness appear almost severe. The memorial bell had been commissioned for Lord Roland, his younger brother, dead long enough for society to remember only courage and charm. Anthony remembered more. Ismay saw it in the way his gaze moved from the bell to her face without passing through Lady Henrietta for permission. "Lower the hammer," he told the bell-ringer. The man obeyed at once. Septimus turned. "Anthony, the casting has already been inspected." "Then a delay of 5 minutes will not injure it. It will injure confidence. Confidence is not a structural support." A workman coughed into his sleeve to conceal a reaction. Lady Henrietta's mouth tightened. Ismay met Anthony's eyes. He had not asked who she had once been or whether attention pleased her. He had heard urgency and stopped the strike. That simple act unsettled her more than ridicule did. Ridicule was familiar. Being taken seriously before she had proved herself was not. Anthony came closer, though he left a proper distance between them. "Tell me exactly what you heard." A slow beat beneath the main note. It strengthened, weakened, then returned before the resonance, faded. Could the frame have caused it? Possibly, but the pulse felt as though it came from the bell itself. She forced herself not to embellish. "I can't tell you why without hearing it safely examined." His expression did not change, but something in his attention sharpened. "Then it will be examined." Septimus gave a quiet laugh. "By whom, Miss Tarrant?" "By someone qualified to inspect the metal," Anthony said. "Miss Tarrant has already supplied the reason to do so." Lady Henrietta crossed the grass toward them. "Your Grace, the entire parish has prepared for this ceremony. Rowland's regiment has sent representatives. The subscribers expect dignity, not a nervous interruption from a woman whose livelihood once depended upon making rooms look at her." The old injury landed cleanly because it was true. Ismay had once stood beneath chandeliers and sung for money. She had also learned that a room could praise a woman's voice while doubting every word she spoke with it. Her fingers tightened around the sea glass. Before she could answer, Anthony said, "A woman seeking attention would have waited until the subscribers arrived." Silence followed. Lady Henrietta's expression cooled. Septimus glanced toward the road, where the first carriage would soon appear beyond the hedgerow. "We have indulged this long enough," he said. "A lighter second strike will settle the question. If the bell sounds cleanly, we proceed. If not, we stop." "I have already ordered it stopped," Anthony said, "and I am telling you the ringer can barely touch it." Septimus looked upward. Mr. Hale, half strength, no more. The bell-ringer hesitated between a duke's command and the work secretary who had supervised him for months. "Your Grace," Anthony stepped forward. "Do not." The hammer moved. It did not land with the force of the first test, yet the bronze answered more violently. A warped note rolled through the frame. Beneath it came the same slow-beating pulse Ismay had heard before, only louder now, followed by a hard metallic report that did not belong to music. A dark line opened across the sound bow. The crack ran upward with a sound like thick ice breaking beneath weight. Someone shouted. The oak frame lurched as the bell shifted against its supports. A small fragment snapped free from the edge and struck the flagstones. Anthony reached Ismay before she understood that she had not moved. His hand closed around her upper left arm and pulled her behind the stone base of the temporary rail as grit scattered across her cheek and sleeve. The contact was firm, necessary, and gone the instant the bell settled. Pain bloomed where his fingers had caught her, no worse than a bruise. A sharp grain of stone had scraped the skin near her wrist. She barely noticed. The workmen rushed toward the supports, but Anthony's voice stopped them. "No one touches the bell. Every man froze. Clear the frame. Leave the tools where they are. Dr. Wilmot, send someone to close the path before the carriages arrive." He looked at Septimus. "The test is over." Septimus had gone pale, though anger returned quickly enough to cover it. That crack might have opened under any strike. It opened under the strike you ordered, because she frightened everyone into mishandling the test. Ismay stepped from behind the stone base. Her arm throbbed beneath her sleeve. The ringer did not mishandle anything. The flaw was already there. Lady Henrietta stared at the fractured bell, then at Ismay. "You approached the frame during the choir placement yesterday." "I stood where Reverend Wilmot asked me to stand, close enough to hear what no one else heard." "Yes," Ismay said, "that is what hearing means." Anthony looked toward the flagstones. Something narrow and curled lay several feet from the fallen fragment, catching the weak dawn light. It was not part of the fracture. Its edges were too regular, its curve too tight. He crouched without touching it. "Bellairs will seal this when he arrives," he said. "Until then, no one goes near it." Ismay saw the metallic shaving and felt the cold certainty of the wrong note settle into a different kind of fear. Metal had been removed from the bell before the strike. Anthony rose and faced her first. Not his aunt, not Septimus, not the waiting clergy. "What did you hear before it cracked?" he asked. She drew a careful breath. "A warning." His gaze remained on hers. "Then we begin there." Behind him, on the presentation table, the open ceremonial hammer case rested in its bed of red baize. One narrow groove marked the lining where an object had recently pressed against it. Anthony's attention shifted. Deep inside the seam, something metallic glinted. By 2:30, the rain had begun as a fine grey mist, settling over St. Cuthbert's unfinished tower and darkening the flagstones around the temporary bell frame. The subscribers had been turned away with apologies. The choir boys had gone home. Only the cracked bell remained where it had failed, braced within the oak structure and watched by 2 estate men under the Duke's direct order. Ismay stood beneath the covered south porch, with her left arm aching beneath her sleeve and a narrow strip of linen wrapped around the scrape near her wrist. Mrs. Clovelly had insisted upon cleaning it at the rectory, then had brought her back in a closed carriage when Anthony requested her presence as a witness. He had not summoned her as though she were a servant. The note had asked whether she was willing to return. That distinction should not have mattered as much as it did. On a trestle table beneath the porch, the presentation hammer case lay open beside several folded sheets of clean paper. Its silver hammer had already been removed and placed apart. Reverend Dr. Wilmot stood at one end of the table, solemn and visibly troubled. Beside him was Mr. Bellairs, the Duke's estate solicitor, a narrow-faced man with iron-grey whiskers and a manner so exact that even the rain appeared to fall more carefully around him. Anthony stood opposite Ismay. Septimus Kersey remained several paces away, not invited to touch anything. Lady Henrietta had declined to attend what she called a theatrical inspection, though she had sent a footman twice to ask when the memorial committee might resume control of its own property. "The committee may resume control when I know what has been done to it." Anthony had replied the second time. The footman had carried the sentence away without changing expression. Shaving A still lay where it had fallen that morning. Mr. Bellairs had placed an inverted glass bowl over it until the witnesses assembled. Now he lifted the bowl and used the edge of a folded paper to ease the curled piece of bronze onto a second sheet. He did not touch it with his fingers, found on the flagstone at approximately 7 minutes after the crack. He said. Dr. Wilmot nodded. In the presence of His Grace, Miss Tarrant, Mr. Kersey, myself, and at least 5 workmen. Bellairs wrote the details in a neat hand. Anthony turned toward the open hammer case. The second object is inside the lining. Septimus gave a restrained sigh. If there is an object, a thread may glitter in poor light. Red thread does not usually resemble bronze, Ismay said. Septimus's eyes moved to her bandaged wrist. You seem remarkably certain from a distance. I'm certain enough not to reach into it. For one brief instant, Anthony's mouth shifted at the corner. It was not quite a smile, but Ismay saw the effort required to suppress it. The solemnity of the morning had not vanished, neither had the danger, yet the flicker of shared amusement passed between them with surprising warmth. Private despite the witnesses around the table. Mr. Bellairs bent over the red baize lining and examined the seam through a small magnifying lens. "There is metal lodged beneath the edge," he said. "The stitching has been disturbed." Septimus stepped forward. One of the estate men moved between him and the table before Anthony needed to speak. "That case has been handled by dozens of people," Septimus said. "It stood open during every committee meeting." Bellairs glanced toward him. "Then the inventory should tell us who last removed it from storage. Inventory books tell us very little when servants forget to write." "Our servants do not generally sign with your name," Anthony said. Silence settled beneath the porch. Bellairs took a pair of fine steel forceps from his leather case and carefully lifted the baize away from the wooden edge. A second curl of bronze emerged from the seam. It was tighter than the first, but of similar width and color. A shallow groove remained where it had pressed into the fabric. Ismay leaned closer without crossing the table. Her pulse quickened. "They appear similar," she said. Septimus gave a short laugh. "At last, an expert opinion?" "No," she replied. "An observation. I can't tell you whether they came from the same bell, the same tool, or even the same mixture of metal." Anthony looked at her rather than the shavings. "What can you tell us?" "That both are curled. Both have regular edges. Both look newly exposed rather than weathered. Anything beyond that requires a founder or someone trained to examine the metal." Mr. Bellairs paused over his notes. "A useful distinction." Anthony's gaze held hers for another moment. He did not appear disappointed by the limits of her answer. If anything, the restraint seemed to increase his attention. "Then we will not ask you to claim more than you know," he said. The words eased something within her that she had not realized was braced for attack. Bellairs placed shaving B on a separate paper and labeled it with the exact location, time, and names of those present. He folded each sheet into its own packet. Anthony pressed his signet into dark red wax across both closures. Dr. Wilmot signed over the folded edges. Bellairs added his own initials and entered each packet into the temporary evidence list. Shaving A and shaving B remained separate. Neither left the table until Bellairs placed them in two distinct compartments of his locking dispatch case. "Now the lining," Anthony said. Bellairs examined the long indentation beneath the baize. Something narrow rested here, hard enough to compress the fabric and mark the wood below. "The silver hammer?" Dr. Wilmot asked. "No, the hammer lies in the central recess." Ismay studied the shape. It was too slim for the handle and too long for any fitting she could see. Bellairs traced the air above it without touching, possibly a file, half round, judging by the curved pressure line. Septimus's expression hardened. "You are constructing an accusation from damaged upholstery." "I'm recording a shape," Bellairs said. "An accusation requires a person." Anthony moved to the small ledger Dr. Wilmot had brought from the vestry. "Who signed out the case?" The rector opened it to a ribbon-marked page. The entries listed candles, banners, the silver hammer, and the presentation case. 3 evenings earlier, the case had been removed for polishing of the silver plate. The signature beneath the entry was clear. Septimus Kersey. "I signed for the ceremonial pieces," Septimus said. "That was my duty." "When did you return them?" Anthony asked. "Yesterday afternoon." "Who received them?" "A footman." "Which footman?" Septimus hesitated. "I don't remember." Anthony's voice remained level. "You will." Ismay looked back toward the cracked bell beyond the porch. The mist had silvered its surface, and the fissure showed as a black line across the lower curve. The uneven beat could have come from unequal thickness, she said, or from inconsistent density in the metal. If material was filed away from one section, it might affect the sound. But I can't say whether it would be enough to cause what we heard. Who can? Anthony asked. A bell founder, Dr. Wilmot cleared his throat. Hobden and Sons are in York. Their name appears on the committee invoice. Send for Mr. Hobden, Anthony said. Not a clerk, the founder himself, if he will come. Septimus folded his arms. You intend to bring a tradesman from York because a retired singer disliked a note. Anthony closed the ledger. I intend to bring him because a memorial bell cracked before its dedication. 2 metal shavings have been found where none should be, and the case assigned to you bears the impression of a missing file. Assigned to me, not owned by me. That difference may prove important. Septimus looked toward Ismay. And what position does Miss Tarrant hold in this inquiry? Anthony did not answer at once. He turned to her. Will you serve as an acoustic witness? The request, made before the others, and without assumption, steadied her more effectively than the sea-glass in her pocket. If my role is limited to what I heard and what I can honestly explain, it will be. And if I'm not expected to approve conclusions reached before the evidence. The nearly hidden smile returned to his eyes. I suspect that would be difficult to make you do. Impossible, she said. Then we understand one another. Septimus's face showed that he understood something too, though he disliked it. Bellairs closed the dispatch case over the 2 sealed packets. Dr. Wilmot sent a messenger toward York before dusk. Near evening, the reply came by telegraph from Hobden and Sons. Mr. Josiah Hobden would arrive the following morning. His message contained one further statement. Every completed bell from his foundry bore a maker's stamp beneath the crown. No such stamp could be seen anywhere on the cracked bell at St. Cuthbert's. Mr. Josiah Hobden arrived from York shortly after 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, with rain on the shoulders of his dark wool coat and a leather case clasped beneath one arm. He was not the silver-haired master craftsman Ismay had imagined from the name on the committee invoice. He was perhaps 45, square-handed, spare in speech, and visibly unimpressed by rank. He bowed to Anthony, nodded to Dr. Wilmot and Mr. Bellairs, then looked past all 3 men toward the cracked bell standing beneath its guarded oak frame. No one has moved it, he asked. No one has touched the bell since yesterday morning, Anthony replied. The 2 shavings are sealed separately in Mr. Bellairs' custody. Hobden gave the solicitor a brief approving glance. Good. Metal remembers rough handling even when witnesses don't. Septimus Kersey, who had arrived before the founder and had spent the intervening time questioning every delay, folded his arms. You may find that the bell remembers nothing more serious than an unfortunate test strike. Hobden did not answer him. He walked around the frame once, stopping at each support, then asked for a ladder and 2 experienced workmen. No one climbed until he had inspected the braces from the ground. Ismay watched from a safe distance beside Mrs. Clovelly, her bandaged wrist hidden beneath her glove and the bruise on her upper arm tender whenever she shifted her cloak. Anthony had noticed the stiffness when she arrived, but had not asked in front of the others. She was grateful for the restraint. Gratitude, however, did not explain why she remained aware of where he stood. Hobden ascended only high enough to examine the lower curve of the bell. He used a hand lens, a small steel rule, and the light from a hooded lantern. Minutes passed. The unfinished tower behind them smelled of wet mortar and cut stone. At last he called down. There is black paint beneath the crown where no paint should be. Anthony stepped closer to the ladder, but remained outside the marked boundary. Can you see a stamp? I can see where one may have been. Hobden adjusted the lantern. The surface has been worked, ground or filed, then covered. Septimus looked toward Bellairs. Anyone could have painted a bell after delivery. Anyone could, Hobden said. Not everyone would remove a founder's mark first. He descended and asked Bellairs to record the location. The solicitor did so without opening the dispatch case that held shaving A and shaving B. Both packets remained sealed. Hobden then examined the visible fissure from the ground. He crouched, studied the sound bow, and traced the air several inches from the bronze. There is a channel here, he said, shallow but deliberate. Ismay moved closer only when he beckoned. Anthony shifted with her, not touching, merely ensuring that Septimus did not crowd the inspection. The channel appeared as a narrow crescent near the beginning of the crack. In yesterday's confusion, she had seen only the fracture. Now she could distinguish a smoother line beneath it, regular where the broken metal was jagged. Could that have caused the bell to fail? Anthony asked. Hobden considered before answering. It could have weakened this section. Whether it was enough by itself, I won't say. The wall may also be uneven. The alloy may be poor. I would need a proper sample, removed under witness, and an assayer before I spoke beyond the work of the tool. Ismay felt an immediate respect for him. He did not treat uncertainty as weakness. Septimus appeared less pleased. So you cannot prove sabotage. I can prove that someone worked the surface where a finished bell should not have been worked. Hobden looked toward him. The word you choose for that is your concern. Anthony's gaze moved to Ismay. Will you tell Mr. Hobden what you heard? Yes. The answer came too quickly, and the old tightness returned below her ribs. She could describe the sound. That was different from making it. Yet Hobden asked her to reproduce the beat, if she was able. And the committee men turned toward her with the expectant stillness of an audience. Ismay's fingers closed around the sea-glass pebble in her pocket. She had not sung alone before strangers. Since leaving the provincial circuit, a voice could be praised one moment and used as evidence of vanity the next. Anthony seemed to read something in her face. Only if you are willing, he said. One demonstration is enough. His tone contained no command. Ismay looked at him. He was not waiting to be entertained. He was waiting to understand. I'll do it once, she said. Hobden positioned himself several paces away and asked for the note she believed closest to the bell's main tone. Ismay drew a careful breath and began softly. The first sound was steady, round, and low enough to settle beneath the porch roof. Then she introduced a second pitch beside it, close but not identical. The two tones met through the controlled movement of her voice, creating a slow swell and retreat. A pulse emerged. It seemed to breathe between the notes. She sustained it for only a few seconds before stopping. Silence followed. Not applause, not the restless pause before judgment. Anthony's eyes remained on hers, and for one unguarded instant, she saw the effect the sound had made upon him. It was not admiration for performance. It was recognition of what it had cost her to offer it. The intimacy of being understood without explanation unsettled her more than praise ever had. Hobden broke the silence first. Yes, that sort of beating can result when two close frequencies compete. Unequal wall thickness could produce it, so could irregular density in the metal. A committee member near Lady Henrietta gave a thin smile. Miss Tarrant appears to have enjoyed singing for the room after all. Heat rose beneath Ismay's collar, but she did not look away from him. I would have preferred the bell not to crack. Anthony turned before anyone could laugh. Mr. Hobden has his demonstration. There will not be another. The finality in his voice cleared the smile from the man's face. Hobden requested the committee invoice and the freight papers. Bellairs produced them from a separate document portfolio. The founder read the invoice twice. His expression changed only when he reached the delivery date. "This is not from my office." Septimus stepped forward. "Your company name is printed at the head. So is the address. The paper is an imitation." Hobden tapped the lower corner. "My clerk marks every completed delivery with his initials beside the weight. There are no initials here." Bellairs opened the accompanying Weybridge ticket. "Could this have been issued at your yard?" Hobden studied it. No completed Haldon memorial bell ever left Hobden and Sons. Dr. Wilmot stared at him. "You accepted the commission?" "We accepted it. We did not complete it because the promised bronze never arrived, and the final payment was withheld." Septimus's face hardened. "That is impossible." "My ledgers are in York," Hobden replied. "They will show what I have said." Anthony took the ticket from Bellairs by its edges. Then, where was this Wade? The printed heading named Hobden and Sons, but a faint station code had been pressed into the lower margin by the Weybridge mechanism. Bellairs bent close, then consulted the railway directory from his case. He ran one finger down the page and stopped. "Not Hobden's yard," he said. "The code belongs to a private siding east of York." "Whose siding?" Anthony asked. Bellairs looked across the table at Septimus. "Kersey Metal and Rail Supply." By Wednesday afternoon, the rain had passed, leaving the stone paths around St. Cuthbert's dark and shining beneath a low silver sky. The cracked bell remained beneath its guarded oak frame, untouched except for Mr. Hobden's inspection, while Mr. Bellairs had carried shaving A and shaving B back to Lindenshaw Hall in separate sealed packets inside his locked dispatch case. Ismay knew the facts had begun to harden into something larger than accident. A false delivery paper, a missing founder's mark, a private railway siding belonging to Kersey Metal and Rail Supply. Yet when a note from the Duke arrived at the rectory, asking whether she would meet him in the vestry, it was not the bell she feared he meant to discuss. Mrs. Clovelly accompanied her and settled near the open inner door with a basket of parish accounts, close enough to preserve propriety and far enough to permit honest speech. Anthony stood beside the long oak table where choir books were usually stacked before Sunday service. He had removed his gloves. One hand rested near a folded newspaper cutting, though he did not touch it as Ismay entered. "Miss Tarrant," he said, "thank you for coming. Your note said I could decline. You could have." "That is why I came." Something quiet passed through his expression. Approval, perhaps, though he did not presume upon it. He waited until Mrs. Clovelly had taken her place, then gestured toward the chair opposite him. Ismay remained standing. Her left arm still carried a fading bruise where he had pulled her clear of the bell frame. But the scrape near her wrist had already begun to close. She kept both injuries beneath her sleeve. Anthony did not ask about them. Instead, he lifted the newspaper cutting. "Lady Henrietta has repeated the word theatrical 3 times in 2 days." Ismay felt the old tightening beneath her ribs. She has always admired repetition when it serves her. "Why does she use that word for you?" "Because she knows it wounds more efficiently than a lie." He placed the cutting on the table between them without turning it toward her. "Mr. Bellairs found this among the memorial committee papers." It was not entered in the official record. Ismay recognized the yellowed edge before she saw the printed heading, the Provincial Musical Review, her last season, her last public humiliation. She drew the blue-green sea glass pebble from her pocket and closed her fingers around it. "I sang professionally," she said. "Not in London, mostly York, Leeds, Scarborough, and the smaller northern circuits. Under your own name, under Miss May Tarrant." A manager decided Ismay looked difficult on a bill. Anthony's mouth almost curved. Was he wrong? Entirely. The answer escaped before caution could stop it. This time he did smile, though only briefly. It changed his face more than she expected. He seemed less like a portrait of inherited authority and more like a man who had once laughed easily and had forgotten the habit. "What happened?" he asked. Ismay looked toward the vestry window. The glass was old enough to soften the churchyard beyond it. A conductor altered the final verse of a memorial program. The original words honored the dead. His version praised a living political patron who had paid for the event. Anthony's expression sharpened. "And you refused to sing it." "I asked him to restore the original text. He said the audience would never know the difference." Her grip tightened around the sea glass. "I told him I would." "So you walked away?" I stood silent while the orchestra finished without me. She heard again the restless shifting of the crowd, the conductor's fury, the whisper that moved through the hall before she had even left the platform. The review called me unstable, vain, too proud to distinguish principle from performance. Anthony glanced toward the cutting. "It says you valued spectacle above duty. It says many things. Were any true?" Ismay met his eyes. "I was frightened. I was angry. I wanted the conductor exposed. I also knew that if I spoke too passionately, passion itself would be used as proof against me. So I left, and never returned. My mother fell ill that winter. I nursed her until she died. By then the contracts had stopped coming. The sea glass slipped from her hand. It struck the flagstone with a small, bright sound and rolled beneath the edge of the table. Anthony bent before she could. He picked it up. But unlike Lady Henrietta, with a program, or Septimus, with a ledger, he did not close his hand around the object as though possession gave him meaning. He held it on his open palm. The stone was smooth, blue-green, cloudy at the center where years in the sea had softened some old broken edge. "What is it?" he asked. "A piece of sea glass. I can see that. Then you know more than most people who ask." His gaze lifted to hers. "Why do you carry it?" Ismay hesitated. The answer felt more intimate than the history of her career. "My mother gave it to me before my first solo at Scarborough. She said the sea had once broken it, but time had made it safe to hold." Anthony looked down at the stone again. Did she believe the same of people? Only when they did the work. He absorbed that without defensiveness. Then he extended his hand slightly. "May I?" The question startled her. He already held the pebble. Yet she understood that he was asking something else. Permission to return it with care. Permission to cross the small distance between them. Ismay opened her hand. "Yes." Anthony placed the sea glass in the center of her palm. His fingers brushed hers, warm and deliberate, then folded her hand gently around the stone. The touch lasted no more than a breath. It was restrained enough for the vestry, proper enough for Mrs. Clovelly's presence, yet unmistakably intentional. Ismay did not pull away. The simple pressure of his fingers sent a quiet awareness along her wrist, not sharp, not frightening, but impossible to dismiss. When he released her, the pebble seemed warmer than before. Anthony stepped back first. "My brother loved public gestures," he said. The sudden change in subject did not lessen the intimacy. It deepened it. Roland could enter a room late and make everyone grateful he had delayed them. He made promises in front of witnesses because witnesses admired the promise more than they examined the cost. And you paid the cost. Often. Anthony moved toward the narrow window. Debts settled. Letters answered. Officers persuaded not to repeat stories. Friends reassured. Servants compensated. His voice remained even, but the stillness of his shoulders betrayed what composure concealed. After he died, people remembered only that he was brave. Was he? Ismay asked. Anthony looked back at her. Yes. Then saying he was reckless doesn't erase his courage. Society prefers its dead simplified. Society prefers everyone simplified. She glanced at the hostile review on the table. The living can object. The dead cannot. Then perhaps the living owe them charity. Charity isn't the same as invention. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but recognition. Ismay continued carefully. The bell was commissioned to remember Lord Roland, but I don't yet understand whether this memorial is meant to remember him or absolve him. The words settled between them with more force than her sung demonstration had carried the day before. Mrs. Clovelly's page stopped turning near the door. Anthony's face did not harden. That would have been easier. Instead, grief moved through it, quiet and unguarded, revealing how precisely the question had struck. He looked toward the church beyond the vestry wall, where the cracked bell stood under guard for a brother who could no longer defend himself or confess. I don't know, he said. It was the first answer he had given her that contained no authority at all. Before either of them could speak again, the vestry door opened and Mr. Bellairs entered with a document folio beneath his arm. Your Grace, he said, pausing when he saw Ismay. Miss Tarrant, Mr. Hobden has confirmed the original memorial specification. Anthony turned. And Bellairs set the folio on the table. The bronze was not meant to be ordinary bell metal. The principal material was to come from a decommissioned Crimean field gun, legally purchased after government disposal and donated by Lord Roland's former regiment. Anthony went completely still. Ismay felt the sea glass press into her palm. A memorial built to preserve a soldier's name had been cast from metal that was never supposed to disappear. By Friday morning, the records from York had arrived in 3 tied bundles that smelled faintly of coal smoke, damp paper, and the leather satchels in which they had travelled. Mr. Bellairs arranged them across the long table in Lindenshaw Hall's map room, placing the memorial committee accounts on one side, the railway copies in the centre, and Mr. Hobden's foundry correspondence beneath a brass paperweight shaped like a lion. Shaving A and shaving B remained sealed separately in his locked dispatch case. The cracked bell still stood beneath guard at St. Cuthbert's. Nothing important had moved without witness. Yet the story told by the papers appeared to have split in two. Ismay stood beside Mrs. Clovelly near the window, while Anthony read the first freight entry aloud. 1 decommissioned field gun received at York Goods Depot on the 23rd of August. Regimental disposal mark confirmed. Weight entered in full. He placed the page down. The next record bore the same date and described onward transport toward Hobden and Sons. A third document, written in a different hand, redirected something listed only as damaged fittings to industrial salvage. They cannot both be accurate, Ismay said, not if the full weight was entered at York. Mr. Hobden, who had returned from the rectory after examining his own correspondence, rested both hands on the table. No gun bronze reached my yard, not 1 bar. Not one broken fitting. Septimus stood across from him, immaculately dressed despite the early hour. Then your yard failed to record it. My yard records every pound that crosses the gate. All businesses make errors. Some errors arrive with forged weighbridge tickets. Anthony raised his gaze. Septimus. The warning was quiet, but it ended the exchange. Lady Henrietta sat near the fire with a silver-headed cane against her chair. She had not needed it when she entered. Ismay suspected its chief use was to make silence feel ceremonial. The second entry says industrial salvage, she observed. Surely that might refer to damaged ironwork from the carriage rather than the gun itself. Bellairs opened another sheet. The railway clerk recorded the total consignment under one seal. There was no separate carriage of fittings. Then the clerk was careless. You appear determined to discover carelessness everywhere except within your own family, Anthony said. Lady Henrietta's expression did not change, but the hand resting on the cane tightened. Ismay watched him return to the documents. He had slept little. The fatigue showed only in the faint shadow beneath his eyes and the way he pressed two fingers, briefly, against the bridge of his nose before reading the next line. He was no longer merely defending a memorial. He was beginning to question the machinery that had created it. Bellairs unfolded a private freight memorandum. This bears the Davenant crest and directs a Kersey consignment through the eastern siding. Anthony examined the seal impression. It is genuine. A genuine crest can be used on a dishonest order, Ismay said. Septimus looked at her. A former singer now instructs us in commercial seals? No, I'm instructing you in sentences. Mr. Bellairs said, the crest is genuine. He did not say the order is. Anthony's head turned toward her. The moment was too serious for laughter, yet something almost warm passed through his face. A distinction worth preserving, he said. Lady Henrietta's cane tapped once against the carpet. Your Grace, this inquiry is becoming an exhibition of Miss Tarrant's opinions. Ismay felt the sea-glass pebble in her pocket, but she did not reach for it, only where the papers require grammar. Mr. Hobden coughed into his fist. Bellairs looked down quickly. Anthony's mouth curved before discipline reclaimed it. The brief amusement was not at her expense. It belonged to both of them. A small private clearing in a room crowded with suspicion. Ismay had known men who admired wit only when it left them superior. Anthony seemed to value the fact that hers did not. Bellairs returned to the railway copies. A former freight clerk named Mr. Elias Morton may be able to clarify the crest-marked consignment. He left the York Depot last month and now lodges near Lindenshaw. Septimus answered too quickly. Morton was dismissed for drink. Bellairs glanced at the page. His railway service record says he resigned. Records can be generous. You have spent 2 days arguing that records are unreliable whenever they inconvenience you, Anthony said. That position cannot remain useful forever. The clerk was brought to Lindenshaw Hall on Saturday morning. He was a narrow man in a worn brown coat, with a careful manner that suggested years spent lifting boxes more valuable than anything he owned. Mrs. Clovelly remained with Ismay in the adjoining morning room, whose doors stood open to the map room. Morton removed his cap and turned it between his hands. I remember the consignment, Your Grace. A field piece cut for transport. Brass fittings separate. Bronze marked for Hobden. Did it leave York for Hobden's yard? Bellairs asked. Morton swallowed. Not directly. Septimus stood near the mantel. You should answer only what you know. Morton's eyes flickered toward him. I know the wagon was changed. By whose instruction? Anthony asked. A Kersey order came through the East Office. It carried the Davenant crest. Who presented it? Morton hesitated. The room seemed to contract around that silence. Mr. Kersey's shipping man, he said at last. Septimus gave a short, incredulous laugh. A man who cannot name the shipping agent expects us to accept this. I can name him, Morton replied. Mr. Vale. Bellairs wrote it down. Anthony did not look away from the clerk. Will you put this in an affidavit? Morton looked toward the doors, the long windows, and the liveried footman beyond them. I'll need my wages protected, Your Grace. I've a wife and 2 girls. If your account is truthful, no man employed on my estates will be permitted to punish you for giving it. Ismay noticed the care in Anthony's wording. He did not promise what lay beyond his power. He offered what he could lawfully control. Morton nodded. Then I'll sign. Bellairs sent for writing paper. While they waited, Anthony moved beside Ismay at the table where the freight route had been marked. Across a county map, he leaned over the eastern siding, and she pointed to the branch line leading away from Hobden's district. Their sleeves brushed. The contact was slight. Nothing more than wool against wool, but both of them became still for a fraction of a second. Anthony did not move closer. Ismay did not step away. If the bronze went through the eastern siding, she said, keeping her voice steady, it could have entered Kersey's storage without appearing at Hobden's gate. And if it was sold from there, then the memorial bell was never cast from Roland's gun. Anthony looked down at the map. Grief crossed his face, quieter than anger and harder to resist. A memorial can be false before anyone speaks at it. Ismay thought of the hostile review she still kept folded in a box at the rectory. Yes, he glanced at her. Why did you keep that newspaper cutting? The question surprised her. To remember what confident words can become when no one challenges them. Punishment, instruction. For whom? Mostly for myself. He considered that. The committee may be doing the same to Roland, turning one polished account into history. Ismay studied him. The difference is that Lord Roland cannot object, and the living can, if they choose to. A faint smile returned to his eyes. You make every answer sound like a summons. Only the inconvenient ones. Their sleeves touched again when he straightened. This time, neither acknowledged it. Bellairs re-entered carrying the affidavit paper. Morton read the first lines, then set down the pen. His face had gone pale. I can't sign today. Anthony's expression hardened. Why? I've been offered work in Leeds. Good work. Better wages. Since when? An hour ago. A messenger found my wife. Bellairs looked toward Septimus, but the space beside the mantel was empty. Septimus had left the room without announcement. Morton put on his cap with shaking hands. I'm sorry, Your Grace. We leave tonight. He departed before Anthony could compel nothing and promise no more. By dusk, Bellairs' man reported that Morton's lodging had been cleared. The clerk, his wife, and their 2 daughters had taken the northbound train. On the map room table, the unsigned affidavit remained beneath the Davenant crest. That same evening, embossed invitations arrived throughout the parish for a memorial subscribers' concert at Haldon Assembly Hall. At the top of the program, printed in elegant black type, appeared a name Ismay had not used in years, Miss May Tarrant, formerly of the provincial oratorio circuit. By Monday evening, Haldon Assembly Hall had been transformed into a chamber of polished cruelty. Wax candles burned in 3 crystal chandeliers. Black ribbons framed the musicians' platform. Portraits of dead Davenant men watched from the panelled walls while memorial subscribers filled the rows below in mourning silk, dark wool, and the subdued colors expected of respectable grief. At the entrance, each guest received a printed program on heavy cream paper. Ismay knew what had been done before she reached her seat. Conversations softened as she passed. Several ladies lifted their programs and looked from the name printed at the top to her face, with the avid discretion of people pretending not to stare. Miss May Tarrant, formerly of the provincial oratorio circuit. Beneath it appeared the title of a sacred air she had not sung in 12 years. She had not agreed to perform. She had not even been told that music would form part of the evening. Mrs. Clovelly, seated beside her in the second row, read the program and went rigid. This is deliberate. Yes. Ismay folded the paper once and placed it on her lap. The blue-green sea-glass pebble lay inside her right glove, cool against her palm. She did not close her fingers around it. Not yet. Across the aisle, Anthony stood with Mr. Bellairs near the platform steps. The moment he saw the printed name, his expression changed. He crossed the floor before the first committee address began. "Did you consent to this?" he asked. Ismay held up the program. "Does it look as though I did?" "No." His gaze moved toward Lady Henrietta, who sat beneath the central chandelier with Septimus at her side. "I'll have the programs collected. That won't collect the knowledge from everyone who has read them." He looked back at her. "Then I'll cancel the concert, and they'll say I was afraid to sing. You are not required to prove courage by submitting to an ambush. Nor am I required to let you decide whether I can endure one." The words were quiet, but they landed between them with enough force that Mrs. Clovelly lowered her eyes to the program. Anthony did not bristle. "What do you want done?" "Nothing yet. Let them show us what they intend." His jaw tightened. "Very well. But if they attempt to compel you, they will fail." For a moment, the anger in his face gave way to something more personal. He looked as though he wished to say that failure would not prevent harm. Before he could, Septimus stepped onto the platform and called the room to order. The opening address concerned Lord Roland's service, the unfinished tower, and the unfortunate delay in the bell's dedication. Septimus spoke smoothly, honoring sacrifice, while avoiding every fact that might stain the committee. When he referred to recent dramatic claims, several heads turned toward Ismay. Lady Henrietta followed him. She carried no notes. She needed none. "A memorial," she said, "depends upon dignity, yet dignity has become difficult to preserve when those accustomed to public attention mistake interruption for moral courage." A murmur moved through the hall. Ismay kept her back straight. Lady Henrietta smiled toward her, as one might smile at an unruly child brought before guests. "Many of you will remember Miss May Tarrant. Those who do not may know her by her present name, Miss Ismay Tarrant. She once appeared upon provincial concert platforms and received payment for memorial performances not unlike the one planned here tonight." Septimus held up a document. "This contract is genuine." Mr. Bellairs rose at once. "No one has claimed otherwise." "Then let us avoid needless outrage," Septimus said. "Miss Tarrant was paid to sing at a memorial concert in Leeds. She later abandoned the performance after a dispute with the conductor, leaving the organizers publicly embarrassed." Copies of the old hostile review began moving through the rows. Ismay recognized the thick black heading, the sentence accusing her of vanity, and the phrase Lady Henrietta had repeated for days. Unable to distinguish principle from performance, every word was real. That made the weapon sharper. Septimus looked directly at her. "We are asked to accept that a former professional singer, long absent from public attention, happened to discover a flaw no one else could hear. We are asked to believe that her interruption, her private demonstrations, and her increasing proximity to His grace arise from nothing more than civic concern. Anthony moved before the murmurs could swell. He climbed the platform without waiting to be announced. His presence silenced the room more effectively than any bell. "Miss Tarrant's past is genuine," he said. "So is the sequence of events on the 4th of October. She warned us before the bell cracked. Mr. Hobden has confirmed that the acoustic disturbance she described is consistent with unequal thickness or irregular metal density. The founder's mark was concealed. The delivery papers remain unexplained. Her former occupation alters none of those facts." Septimus spread his hands. "And yet your grace has accepted her account from the first. I accepted that warning should be examined before it was mocked. The parish may wonder whether your confidence has become personal." The room went very still. Anthony's face hardened, but Ismay saw the danger at once. If he defended her character with his name, they would say she possessed him. If he insulted Septimus, they would say passion had replaced evidence. She rose. "You needn't answer that, Your Grace." Every gaze shifted to her. Lady Henrietta's smile deepened. "How considerate. Perhaps Miss Tarrant would prefer to answer in the manner she knows best." She gestured toward the pianist waiting at the side of the platform. "The sacred air printed in the program is prepared. Sing it for us, Miss Tarrant. Let the subscribers judge whether your concern for the memorial is as pure as you claim." Ismay felt the old hall in Leeds return around her, the waiting musicians, the altered words, the audience eager to decide whether refusal proved arrogance. Her sea-glass rested cold against her palm, but she did not need to clench it. She walked toward the platform. Whispers followed her, rising and falling like the false beat beneath the cracked bell. Anthony descended one step, ready to meet her, but stopped when she gave the smallest shake of her head. She climbed alone. Lady Henrietta turned toward the pianist. "Begin." The man placed his hands on the keys. Ismay faced the room. "No." The pianist froze. A lady in the front row drew in a breath. Ismay's voice remained calm. "I was not invited here to perform. My former contract proves that I once earned money by singing. It does not prove that I damaged a bell, forged a freight record, removed a founder's mark, or placed bronze shavings where they were found." Septimus lifted the old review. "It proves you have disrupted memorials before. It proves I refused to sing words that had been altered after I agreed to the program." She looked across the subscribers. "A true fact can be used dishonestly. I was paid to sing. I also refused to turn mourning into praise for a living patron. Both are true. Only one has been printed for you tonight." Lady Henrietta rose. "Your sensitivity does not answer the question of ambition. No woman becomes false because men once paid to hear her voice." The sentence carried to the farthest wall without effort. Ismay let it settle. Then she looked at Anthony. His anger had not vanished, but he did not step in front of her. He allowed the silence to belong to her. That mattered more than rescue. "I will not sing on command," she said, "and I will not let my refusal be rewritten as guilt." She descended from the platform. Anthony moved to the aisle and offered his arm. The gesture was proper, protective, and dangerous. Every eye in the hall waited to turn it into proof of secret attachment. Ismay looked at his extended hand, then met his gaze. "Not here," she said softly. Understanding crossed his face, followed by the sting of being unable to shield her without increasing the injury. He lowered his arm at once. "As you wish." She walked beside Mrs. Clovelly toward the doors under her own power. Behind them, the subscribers had not returned to order. Some whispered her stage name. Others repeated her words. The room no longer belonged entirely to Lady Henrietta. In the entrance hall, Mr. Bellairs approached Anthony with a dark executor's packet sealed in black wax. "This arrived from the family archive during the concert," he said. "It bears Lord Roland's hand." Anthony broke the outer string but not the seal. Through the heavy paper, one line of endorsement showed clearly enough to read: "Authorization granted to Mr. Septimus Kersey for the private sale of the decommissioned gun bronze in satisfaction of personal obligations." Anthony went still. Beyond the closed assembly room doors, the crowd continued debating whether Ismay Tarrant had returned to the stage. In his hands lay proof that the dead man they had gathered to honor had helped remove the very metal meant to preserve his name. On Tuesday morning, the black wax of Lord Roland Davenant's executor packet lay broken on Anthony's desk. But the room felt more sealed than any document. Ismay stood opposite him in the smaller library at Lindenshaw Hall, with Mrs. Clovelly seated near the window and Mr. Bellairs at a side table, ready to witness whatever was read. The old hostile review had followed Ismay home in whispers after the assembly concert. Yet it was not her own name she feared now. It was Roland's. Anthony had sent a note asking whether she would come. He had not commanded her. He had also written that the packet concerned the memorial bronze, and that she had the right to know before the inquiry continued. That honesty had brought her. The paper in his hand was several years old, written in Roland's bold, impatient script, and signed with the careless flourish Anthony knew too well. "It's genuine," Anthony said. His voice was controlled, but not calm. "Bellairs has compared the signature against the regimental correspondence and my brother's private accounts." Bellairs inclined his head. "The paper, ink, and endorsement are consistent with the stated date." Anthony passed the document across the desk. Ismay took it by the edges. The first lines authorized Septimus Kersey to arrange the private sale of the decommissioned gun bronze donated by Roland's former regiment. The proceeds were to satisfy personal obligations that could not be entered in the public estate accounts. A later line instructed Septimus to purchase replacement bronze before the memorial casting and to preserve the appearance of the original gift. Ismay read the words twice. "Personal obligations," she said. "Gambling debts," Anthony answered. "There are markers in the enclosed account list. Roland owed more than he could pay without exposing the matter to the regiment and to me." The confession held no anger toward Ismay. It was directed inward, where grief and shame had been forced to occupy the same narrow space. "Did you know?" she asked. "Not about the gun. I knew there were debts. I settled some. He swore there were no others." Anthony looked at the signature as though the dead hand might still move and explain itself. He authorized the sale. He knew the donated bronze would be diverted. He expected Septimus to replace it later and present the memorial as though nothing had changed. "The document doesn't authorize a false invoice," Ismay said. "No. It doesn't authorize a defective bell. No. And it doesn't authorize anyone to file a weakness into the sound bow. No." Each answer cost him more than the last. Ismay placed the paper on the desk. "Then, Lord Roland's wrongdoing and Septimus's later acts are connected, but they aren't identical." Anthony gave a faint nod. "That is what Bellairs says." "It is also what the document says." She expected the precision to steady him. Instead, he moved toward the window, where the autumn light lay thin across the lawn. The dedication is in 12 days, he said. His regiment has already sent men north. The parish subscriptions were given in his name. If this letter is released now, the memorial will cease to be an inquiry into fraud. It will become an indictment of a dead officer. Perhaps it should become an inquiry into all the truth. An inquiry is not the same as a spectacle. No, but silence can become one. Anthony turned. The grief in his face had hardened into purpose, and Ismay understood before he spoke that he had arranged an answer. We can proceed against Septimus without making Roland's authorization public yet. You can present the false bell, the freight discrepancy, the removed founder's mark, and the filing. Hobden can address the metal. Bellairs can address the records. After the dedication, when the memorial is secure and the regiment has gone, I will release this document with a full statement. Ismay heard the shape beneath the words. It was elegant, respectable, almost convincing. You want the inquiry to tell the truth in an order chosen to protect your brother. I want to separate his weakness from Septimus's crime. By hiding the paper that explains how Septimus gained control of the bronze, by delaying it until after the public has accepted the cleaner story. Anthony crossed back to the desk. I will clear your name before the subscribers. I will state that your warning prevented greater harm. I will also endow an independent choral school under your direction, with funds beyond the committee's reach. You would never again be forced to depend upon parish favor. The offer entered the room with all the weight of his rank. For one treacherous moment, Ismay saw what it could mean. Rooms where girls could learn without being told gratitude was obedience. Salaries paid on time. Music chosen without a patron rewriting the final verse. Then she looked at Roland's authorization and understood why the promise felt wrong. You're asking me to sing another altered ending, she said. Anthony flinched. I'm asking you to allow grief a little mercy. Mercy isn't the same as arrangement. He is dead, Ismay. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. The intimacy of it made the pressure worse, not better. And the people who paid for that bronze are alive, she replied. The workers endangered by the bell are alive. I'm alive. You don't get to make the truth smaller because the dead man was loved. His jaw tightened. You think I'm asking you to lie? I think you're asking me to perform a selective truth while your rank makes refusal costly. I would never punish you for refusing. You don't have to. You've placed a choir school, my public name, and your protection on one side of the choice. On the other is the certainty that I disappoint you. Silence struck deeper than anger. Mrs. Clovelly lowered her gaze. Bellairs did not move. Anthony looked at Ismay as if she had opened a door he had not known was locked. I am trying to protect what remains of him, he said. I know. Her voice softened, but her decision did not. That doesn't make the request just. She removed the small card Bellairs had issued when Anthony appointed her acoustic witness. It bore the inquiry seal and her name in his clerk's hand. Anthony reached toward her as she set it down, then stopped before his fingers crossed the space between them. Ismay placed the credential on the desk rather than in his hand. I can't serve an inquiry whose conclusion is being arranged before the evidence is heard. What will you do? Go to York. The original railway ledger is there. So are Hobden's books and the Eastern siding records. Alone? With Mrs. Clovelly. The older woman closed her account book with quiet finality. We leave tomorrow morning. Anthony's eyes remained on Ismay. You need authority to inspect company records. I need persistence, introductions, and people willing to say no where witnesses can hear them. Authority isn't the only instrument in England. A shadow of the smile he once gave her appeared and vanished. No, it plainly is not. She turned before affection could weaken the line she had drawn. He did not call her back. He did not order the doors closed. By Wednesday morning, Ismay and Mrs. Clovelly stood beneath the iron and glass roof of Harthwaite Station, while porters moved trunks through steam and coal smoke. Their train for York had begun taking passengers. Ismay had one gloved hand on the carriage rail when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Miss Tarrant. She turned. Anthony stood on the platform, breath visible in the cold air, Mr. Bellairs beside him. In Anthony's hand was a heavy solicitor's evidence envelope, sealed across every fold and marked in Bellairs' narrow writing. Lord Rowland's authorization was inside. Anthony had not come to stop her. He had brought the truth she refused to leave behind. Anthony did not offer an explanation until the train had begun to move. Steam blurred Harthwaite Station into grey iron, wet brick, and the pale faces of porters left behind. Mrs. Clovelly sat opposite Ismay with a travelling basket at her feet. Mr. Bellairs occupied the corner nearest the door, his locked dispatch case between his boots. The solicitor's evidence envelope containing Lord Rowland's authorization rested inside it, not in Anthony's hands. I placed the original in Mr. Bellairs' custody before I came to the station, Anthony said. He has made no public copy. Nothing will be withheld from the inquiry. Ismay looked at the dispatch case, then at him. And why are you on this train? The question was not unkind. It was exact. Anthony accepted it as such, because the York records may require my authority before railway officers release certified extracts. Because Hobden has agreed to meet us there, and because I would like permission to join your inquiry. Mrs. Clovelly lowered her eyes. Bellairs studied the passing hedgerows. Ismay had expected Anthony to declare a right, not request a place. It did not erase yesterday, but it mattered. There will be conditions, she said. Name them. Questions about the sound belong to me unless I ask Mr. Hobden to answer. No document is hidden because it injures House Davenant. Exoneration and courtship remain separate. His gaze held hers at the final word. There has been no courtship. Then you should find the condition easy to keep. A faint breath of amusement touched his face, though grief remained beneath it. Agreed. And if we disagree in front of a clerk or witness, you will not end the discussion by reminding anyone that you are a duke. I may need my title to open a door. Open it. Don't use it to close my mouth. Agreed. The train carried them south through autumn rain. No one spoke of Rowland. Bellairs reviewed freight dates. Mrs. Clovelly poured tea from a small travelling flask. Ismay watched Anthony read the same memorandum twice without turning the page. When York's roofs and smoking chimneys appeared, he folded the paper with deliberate care, as though discipline alone could keep private sorrow from entering the evidence. The railway goods office stood beyond the main passenger platforms, among warehouses, sidings, cranes, and rows of freight wagons marked with chalk. Coal smoke hung lower there. Clerks moved behind tall counters, while labourers rolled barrels across iron-edged floors. Anthony's card secured them a private records room, but Ismay noticed he did not enter first. He allowed the senior clerk, Mr. Pritchard, to lead, then waited until Mrs. Clovelly and Ismay had crossed the threshold. Mr. Hobden joined them, carrying his foundry ledger under one arm. The original railway books remained on a sloping desk beneath the clerk's supervision. Bellairs was permitted to take notes, but no ledger left the room. Mr. Pritchard opened the volume for the 23 of August 1869. "Here," he said, "one decommissioned field gun, cut for lawful transport, arrived intact under regimental disposal marks, full weight recorded." His finger moved to the next line. The consignment was initially directed toward Hobden and Sons. A later entry, written in darker ink, changed the destination to Kersey Metal and Rail Supply. "Who authorized that change?" Ismay asked. Pritchard turned to a thin order book. "Mr. Septimus Kersey, acting as Memorial Industrial Secretary." The signature was verified against his company account. Anthony's face became still. "Was the Davenant crest required?" "No, Your Grace. It was attached as assurance of payment." Bellairs copied the entry exactly. Hobden compared it with his own records. "Nothing from that gun reached my yard." Pritchard opened a second ledger. Most of the bronze was later sold onward to a locomotive-bearing manufacturer near Leeds. Ismay felt the words settle heavily. The material intended to carry Roland's memory had been turned into machinery before the memorial bell was cast. "Most?" she asked. The clerk nodded. One crate remained because carriage fees were unpaid, listed as a trunnion section. He sent a porter to the bonded warehouse. They waited 20 minutes before 2 men returned with a small freight trolley carrying a heavy, dark bronze piece packed in straw. No one touched it until Pritchard checked the warehouse seal against the ledger. Hobden then brushed the straw aside. Regimental numbers were stamped along the metal. Beside them appeared the government disposal mark described in the memorial subscription papers. Anthony reached toward the trunnion and stopped before touching it. "Roland would have known those numbers," he said. "So would the men who donated the gun," Ismay replied. There was no comfort in the observation, but there was companionship. He looked at her, grateful that she had not asked him to pretend. The proof meant less than it did. Pritchard produced the Kersey weighbridge record for the substitute bell. The listed weight exceeded the actual weight entered at St. Cuthbert's inspection by several hundredweight. Hobden calculated silently, then shook his head, even allowing for the missing fittings and ordinary loss in casting. That bell could not contain the full donated bronze, not at its present size and weight. "Could it contain any of it?" Anthony asked. "Possibly. An assayer must answer that, but it cannot contain all." Bellairs requested certified extracts of the diversion order, the sale entry, the unpaid carriage record, and the weighbridge figures. Pritchard agreed to prepare them under the railway seal. The original books stayed in York. The surviving trunnion remained in the bonded warehouse pending lawful transfer. Darkness had gathered when they boarded the evening train. Mrs. Clovelly took the seat beside the window and soon closed her eyes, though Ismay suspected she slept very lightly. Bellairs sat in the adjoining compartment with the certified extracts and Roland's sealed authorization locked in his case. Anthony and Ismay faced one another beneath the dim carriage lamp. For several miles, the wheels supplied the only conversation. "I spent years making Roland's recklessness sound noble," Anthony said at last. Ismay waited. "When he wagered too much, I called him generous. When he broke promises, I called him impulsive. When he left consequences for others, I said he trusted too freely." His hands were clasped between his knees. "Anger at the dead felt disloyal, so I converted anger into admiration and expected everyone else to live inside the same account." "You loved him?" "Yes, love can explain the account. It can't certify it." His mouth tightened with something close to pain. "You never make mercy easy. I don't think falsehood is merciful." The train slowed as it approached Selby. Lamps moved beyond the glass. Anthony looked toward the darkened platform and said, "I nearly made you part of the lie because I could not bear to lose him twice." Ismay saw no excuse in his face, only grief. Stripped of rank, she removed her right glove and placed her open hand on the seat between them. She did not reach for him. She offered the choice. Anthony looked at her palm, then at her eyes. "Are you certain?" "Yes," he took her hand carefully. His fingers closed around hers without drawing her nearer. The train moved again, carrying them into the long darkness beyond Selby. They remained hand in hand while Fields passed unseen outside, and Anthony spoke of Roland without polishing him. He told her of courage at Sevastopol, gaming debts, reckless laughter, and letters arriving after trouble had begun. Ismay listened. She did not absolve him. She did not withdraw her hand. The contact endured until Anthony's breathing steadied, and silence no longer felt like punishment. At the next stop, a porter hurried along the platform, calling for the Duke of Haldon. Bellairs opened the adjoining door and accepted a telegram. He read it once, then entered their compartment. "Your Grace, this came from Lindenshaw." Anthony released Ismay only when she did, and the absence of his hand felt immediate. Bellairs held out the message. Septimus Kersey had obtained an emergency works order authorizing the cracked bell's removal from St. Cuthbert's for immediate recasting. The wagon was due before dawn. The telegram forced them off at the next junction and back toward York, where Mr. Bellairs could verify the removal order before any of them acted on rumor. By the time they reached the inn near the station, Thursday evening had settled into rain and coal smoke. Mrs. Clovelly occupied the adjoining sitting room with the connecting door left open, while Bellairs spread railway forms, telegraph slips, and his locked dispatch case across a narrow mahogany table. Anthony stood near the cold hearth, his coat still damp at the shoulders. Ismay remained by the window, listening to carriage wheels hiss over the street below. The journey had left the warmth of his hand in her memory, but neither of them referred to it. Something more difficult had to be faced first. Bellairs unlocked the dispatch case. Shaving A and Shaving B remained sealed in their separate compartments. The certified railway extracts from York lay in a third division. He removed Lord Roland's authorization last, still enclosed in the heavy solicitor's envelope. Anthony had brought to Harthwaite Station that morning. "The original has been copied in my presence," Bellairs said. Dr. Pemberton, a York commissioner for oaths, witnessed the comparison. "Both the copy and original have been sealed. The original remains in my custody unless a magistrate requires it." Anthony looked at Ismay. "It can no longer disappear into a family archive." "No," she said, "it cannot." Bellairs seemed to recognize that the remaining conversation did not belong to him. He gathered the railway papers and moved into the adjoining room, leaving the connecting door open. Mrs. Clovelly murmured something about tea. Crockery shifted softly. Anthony did not approach Ismay at once. He removed his gloves, placed them on the mantel, and looked at his hands as though they had failed him in some visible way. "I owe you an apology," he said. Ismay turned from the window. Yes, the direct answer struck him, but he accepted it. "I tried to decide which truth you were permitted to tell." His voice was low and exact. "I told myself I was separating Roland's weakness from Septimus's crimes. In fact, I was arranging the evidence so that my family would suffer last, after everyone else had already paid the cost." Ismay said nothing. He had not finished. "I offered money for a choir school. while asking you to preserve my preferred account. I used patronage as pressure, whether I intended it or not. I placed your security, your name, and my approval on one side of the choice. Rain tapped against the window glass. And on the other, she asked, your conscience. Anthony lifted his gaze. I nearly made you repeat the same injury that ended your career. Another powerful man asking you to perform altered words, because he believed the occasion mattered more than your consent. The truth of it moved through her with a quieter force than anger. He had not said that she misunderstood. He had not called his request mercy, prudence, or duty. He had named what it had done to her. I will read Roland's authorization publicly myself, he continued. Not after the dedication, not in a private statement prepared by Bellairs. Before any accusation against Septimus is concluded, the whole document will be placed in evidence. Even if it destroys the memorial, a memorial built upon concealment is already destroyed. Ismay studied his face. Fatigue had stripped away the command people usually mistook for strength. He appeared older than 38 and, at the same time, more honest than he had ever allowed himself to be. You loved him, she said. I still do. Then telling the truth will hurt. Yes, it won't make him entirely false. Anthony looked toward the sealed envelope. He sold metal given in trust. He meant to hide it. He also served with courage. He may have been generous. He may have been reckless. He may have feared disgrace enough to behave dishonorably. All of those things can belong to one man. Society will not permit such complexity. Society isn't the only judge of the dead. His mouth tightened. You are kinder to him than I deserve. This isn't kindness to you. Ismay's voice remained gentle. It is accuracy. Exposing what Lord Roland did doesn't require us to pretend he was never loved or brave. A flawed man is not the same thing as a false saint. Anthony turned away sharply, not in rejection, but because the words reached a place his composure could not defend. One hand braced against the mantel. For several breaths, he said nothing. When he spoke again, his voice had roughened. I have spent years believing that anger at him would be a betrayal, so I turned every failure into charm and every burden into proof of affection. You carried what he left and called the weight devotion. His shoulders moved with one unsteady breath. Ismay could have crossed the room then. She did not. Comfort offered too quickly might become absolution, and he had not asked for either. Anthony faced her again. I am not asking you to forgive me tonight. Good. A faint, pained smile touched his face. You remain exact. Someone must. I am asking only whether you believe my conduct can change. Ismay considered before answering. I believe you placed the authorization in neutral custody before asking to join me. I believe you accepted my conditions. I believe you are willing to speak the truth at cost to yourself. But trust is not restored by one correct day. No, it is restored by what follows. Anthony nodded. No defense, no impatience. The restraint softened something within her that argument never could. He looked down, then back at her. May I hold you? The question entered the room without entitlement. Ismay felt her heartbeat deepen. This was not the sea glass placed into her palm, nor the sustained reassurance she had offered on the train. This would be an embrace freely chosen after harm had been named, not before. She glanced once toward the open connecting door. Mrs. Clovelly sat within sight, her attention deliberately fixed on the teapot. Ismay returned her gaze to Anthony. Yes, he waited. She crossed the room herself. Only when she stood before him did he lift his arms. His embrace was careful at first, as though he feared using strength where he had already used power badly. Ismay rested her cheek against his coat and placed both arms around him. When she held him back, his breath left him in a quiet, broken release. He did not pull her closer than she allowed. He did not speak of love. For several moments, they stood inside the honest sorrow between them. Ismay felt no triumph in being right. She felt the difficult tenderness of seeing a man relinquish the lie that had protected him. When they separated, Anthony released her at once. The space between them no longer felt like punishment. A knock sounded from the outer door. Bellairs entered with a railway agent in a dark uniform coat, rain shining on his hat brim. "Your Grace," the agent said, "we have confirmed the wagon instructions." Anthony's composure returned, though not the former armor. "Where is the bell being taken?" "The papers name a foundry in Leeds, but the routing marks don't send it there. The removal wagon is bound for Haldon East siding." Bellairs unfolded a copied order. "From the siding, a private Kersey carrier is scheduled to collect it." Ismay looked at Anthony. "Not York, not Hobden. A furnace they control," he said. The agent nodded. "The wagon left Sant Cuthbert's earlier than the telegram reported. It may already be on the road." Anthony reached for his gloves. "Then we leave before dawn." Ismay slipped the sea-glass pebble into her pocket. Somewhere north of York, the cracked bell was moving through the darkness under a false destination. And by morning, the evidence might be placed beyond every voice that had tried to preserve it. The first grey light of Friday had only begun to gather when the train drew into Harthwaite. And by the time Anthony's party reached Haldon East siding by carriage, the cracked bell was already coming, through the gate on a heavy wagon drawn by 4 sweating horses. Rain had turned the yard to black mud. Steam drifted low from a waiting locomotive, and the rails shone beneath it. The wagon bore a printed destination label naming a reputable foundry in Leeds, but the chalk marks on the rear axle told a different story. 2 short strokes and a hooked letter K directed the load toward a private spur, serving the Kersey furnace beyond the eastern sheds. Mr. Pritchard, the railway superintendent, saw it at once. "That isn't a Leeds routing mark," he said. "It's for the Kersey Works Road." Anthony stepped into the wagon's path and raised one gloved hand. "Stop the team." The driver pulled on the reins. The horses slowed, hooves sliding in the mud, and the wagon came to rest beneath the siding crane. Mr. Bellairs climbed down from the second carriage with his dispatch case strapped across his chest. Mrs. Clovelly followed, while Hobden moved straight toward the load. Ismay descended last. The bruise on her upper arm had nearly faded, and the scrape at her wrist no longer required linen. But the sight of the bell wrapped beneath tarred canvas made the old warning pulse inside her again. The covering had been drawn too tightly around the sound bow. Thick ropes crossed the fracture line and pressed inward against the bronze. "Don't lift it like that," she called. The crane operator paused. A yard foreman frowned. "The bell's secured, miss. It's compressed where the crack begins. If the ropes tighten under weight, the fracture may spread." Hobden examined the binding. "She's right. The sound bow needs support from below before you move a pound of it." The foreman looked toward Anthony, waiting for rank to overrule trade. Anthony did the opposite. "Clear the crane path. No one stands beneath the load. Mr. Hobden directs the handling. Miss Tarrant will tell you where the fracture sounded weakest. Follow them both." Septimus's unauthorized order had already removed the bell from St. Cuthbert's before dawn, but the wagon driver carried no ducal signature, no parish witness, and no lawful instruction to destroy evidence. He produced a folded paper signed by Septimus as industrial secretary and stamped with the memorial committee seal. Bellairs read it once. This permits removal for safety examination. It does not authorize recasting. The driver shifted uneasily. I was told the furnace would take it before noon. Which furnace? Anthony asked. Kersey's, Your Grace. The answer ended any pretense that Leeds had been the true destination. Under Hobden's direction, the workers slid timber blocks beneath the bell and loosened the ropes one at a time. Ismay stood beyond the crane radius and listened to the faint complaints of rope, wood, and metal as the weight shifted. When one support began to settle unevenly into the wagon bed, she heard the pitch of the timber change. The left block is taking more weight, she said. Hobden checked, then ordered another wedge beneath the right side. Only after the bell rested evenly did the crane chains descend. Anthony cleared the yard except for essential workers, Pritchard, Bellairs, Hobden, Ismay, Mrs. Cloverley, and the local constable. He did not tell Ismay to return to the carriage. He created the distance in which her judgment could be used safely. The bell moved slowly into the locked goods shed beside the main office. Once it rested on a timber cradle, Pritchard closed the doors. 3 seals were applied across the iron hasp. The first bore the railway company's mark. The second carried Bellairs' initials in dark wax. The third took the impression of Anthony's signet. No one opens this shed without all 3 custodians present, Anthony said. Pritchard nodded. I'll place a railway watchman at the door. Bellairs recorded the time, witnesses, and condition of the bell. The Leeds label, chalk routing marks, and removal order were placed separately in his document case. By late morning, with all 3 custodians present, the shed was reopened for a controlled visual inspection. Hobden used a lamp to examine the blackened area beneath the crown. Moisture had loosened one edge of the paint already damaged during the earlier inspection. As he angled the light, a small black flake fell onto the clean cloth Bellairs had spread below. Beneath the missing paint, stamped letters emerged from the bronze. Hobden adjusted the lamp. There, K.M.W. Pritchard frowned. Kersey Metalworks. A smaller affiliated casting yard, Bellairs said, under the same company accounts. Anthony stared at the stamp. So the bell was cast within their control. It appears so, Hobden replied. The assay will tell us what they used. Hoofbeats sounded outside. Septimus entered the shed with mud on his boots and anger stripped of polish. You have seized company property without cause. Anthony did not move from beside Bellairs. The bell was purchased by public subscription and commissioned in my brother's name. You attempted to send it to a private furnace under a false destination. For recasting after a dangerous fracture. A fracture in a bell falsely attributed to Hobden and Sons. Septimus saw the exposed stamp. For one instant his face emptied. Then contempt returned. A subsidiary mark proves only that emergency work was contracted elsewhere. Hobden looked at him. You said Hobden cast it. I repeated what the papers showed. Papers issued through your siding, Bellairs said. Septimus turned toward Ismay. And now a singer directs railway labor as though she were a foundry master. Ismay met his gaze. I heard the timber taking uneven weight. Mr. Hobden confirmed it. You hear whatever keeps you near his grace. Anthony's expression cooled, but Ismay spoke first. Then it is fortunate the wood agreed with me. Pritchard concealed a smile. Septimus stepped toward the bell until the constable raised one hand. This entire inquiry is absurd. The shallow groove could never have caused a full fracture. No one answered immediately. Hobden had described the channel as shallow only during the private inspection at St. Cuthbert's. Bellairs had recorded it, but the detail had never been released. Anthony looked at Septimus with terrible calm. "How do you know the depth of the groove?" Septimus's mouth opened, then closed. "Any man can see it." "Not beneath the crack," Hobden said. "Not without the ladder, the lamp, and permission to approach." Bellairs wrote the sentence down. The constable moved closer, though no arrest had been ordered. Anthony said only, "You will remain available to Mr. Bellairs and the magistrate." Septimus left under watch, his silence more damaging than protest. When the shed doors had been resealed, Ismay released the breath she had been holding. A faint smear of black paint marked her cheek, where wind had carried dust from the inspection cloth. Anthony noticed it. He lifted his hand, then stopped. "May I?" She understood. "Yes." With one restrained touch, he brushed the dark speck from her cheek. His fingers did not linger, but the gentleness carried the memory of their embrace in York. He looked as though words had risen to his lips. Instead, he lowered his hand. "Not yet," he said quietly. Ismay knew he meant more than the investigation. "No," she replied. "Not yet." Bellairs approached with a fresh notice. Lady Henrietta had summoned the memorial subscribers to Kersey Metalworks, where she intended to clear her son's name before the county. By the time she spoke, the cracked bell, the hidden stamp, and Septimus's impossible knowledge would all be waiting for her. By Monday morning, the small examination room beside Mr. Bellairs's office had been cleared of everything except one long table, 6 chairs, 2 lamps, and the evidence that could no longer be explained as coincidence. The cracked bell remained sealed inside the Haldon East goods, shed under the railway mark, Bellairs' wax, and Anthony's signet. No one had opened the doors since Friday's inspection. Instead, a certified sample had been taken from the already fractured edge under the supervision of Mr. Pritchard, Mr. Hobden, Bellairs, and the local constable, then sealed before transport to Lindenshaw. A second certified surface sample had arrived from York, removed from the surviving gun trunnion while it remained in railway custody. The trunnion itself had not left the bonded warehouse. Shaving A and Shaving B still occupied separate sealed packets inside Bellairs's dispatch case. Ismay watched as the solicitor placed each object on the table without allowing one to touch another. The independent assayer, Mr. Edwin Mercer of Leeds, examined the seals first. Only after every witness confirmed that they were intact did Bellairs break them. Mercer worked without ceremony. He weighed, scraped, magnified, and compared. His instruments were simple enough to disappoint anyone hoping truth might arrive dramatically. Small scales, clean glass, a hand lens, labeled papers. Yet the silence around the table grew heavier with every result he recorded. Shaving A matched the color, hardness, and visible composition of the sample taken from the cracked bell. Shaving B did the same. The surface sample from the surviving gun trunnion differed clearly. It contained the copper-rich bronze expected from the donated field piece. The bell sample showed a cheaper mixture, unevenly made and burdened with impurities that should never have entered a commissioned memorial casting. "Can you state that the shavings came from this bell?" Bellairs asked. Mercer kept his eyes on his notes. "I can state that both shavings are consistent with the bell sample in composition and working condition. I can also state that neither is consistent with the trunnion sample." "Would you swear to that?" Anthony asked. "I will." Hobden examined the curves beneath his own lens. He compared their width with measurements taken from the filed channel and with a half-round file borrowed from an unrelated foundry chest for demonstration. Both curls were produced by the same kind of action, he said. A half-round file drawn at a shallow angle. The width is consistent with the worked channel in the sound bow. Ismay did not ask whether the filing alone had caused the crack. Hobden had already explained that the defective alloy and uneven wall mattered as well. The strength of the case lay in the chain, not in forcing one clue to carry every burden. Mr. Pritchard arrived from the railway office before noon with certified copies of the route entries and weighbridge figures. He signed each before Bellairs and the constable. The Leeds destination label was false, he said. The chalk marks routed the wagon to the Kersey private spur. The stated bell weight on the Kersey ticket exceeded the actual inspected weight by several hundredweight. Anthony looked toward Mercer. Enough to conceal the missing gun bronze. Enough to make the paper suggest material that was not present, the assayer replied. Bellairs arranged the conclusions in order. The donated bronze had reached York. Septimus redirected it. Most of it had been sold onward. The substitute bell came from a Kersey-affiliated works. Its maker's mark had been hidden. Its recorded weight was false. Its alloy was inferior. A channel had been filed into the sound bow. 2 shavings consistent with that bell had been found in separate places connected to the crack and the presentation case. The attempt to send the bell toward a private furnace had followed. Ismay felt no triumph as the pattern became complete. The evidence did not restore the endangered workers to the morning before the second strike. It did not return Roland's gift to its original form. It only removed the shelter of ambiguity. Late that afternoon, Bellers's clerk entered with news of Elias Morton. The former freight clerk had not settled permanently in Leeds. The promised position had vanished within a day of his arrival, leaving him and his family in rented rooms near the works district. Bellairs had found him through the station porter, who remembered 2 young girls and a brown trunk marked with a railway label. Morton arrived at Lindenshaw on Tuesday morning, worn from travel and angry enough to be steadier than before. They paid my fare north, he said, then told me the post had been filled. Septimus's shipping man, Mr. Vale, had delivered the offer. Morton now understood that the purpose had been to remove him before he signed. Anthony did not promise to control every employer in Yorkshire. He promised something more exact. If you testify truthfully, no tenant, contractor, or business dependent upon House Davenant will be permitted to punish you for it. Bellairs will place that protection in writing. Your railway pension claim will be supported by the records, not by my favour. Morton read the wording twice. Then he signed the affidavit. He identified Septimus's diversion order, the Kersey shipping agent, the crest-marked consignment, and the change of wagon. Bellairs sealed the statement and prepared a duplicate for the county magistrate. By Wednesday evening, every document, object, and witness had been assigned a place in the final presentation. Anthony brought Ismay a complete written list. Nothing had been withheld. Roland's authorization appeared in the center of the first page, not buried at the end. They met in the map room with Mrs. Cloverley, Bellairs, Hobden, Mercer, and Pritchard present. "Do you want me absent tomorrow?" Anthony asked her. The room stilled. He did not phrase it as sacrifice or expect praise for offering. "No," Ismay said. "I want you present." His eyes held hers. "Under what conditions?" "You read Lord Roland's authorization before I explain the bell. Not after Septimus is accused. Not after your house has been protected by the rest of the evidence. Agreed. I open with what I heard. Mr. Hobden explains the structure. Mr. Mercer explains the metal. Mr. Pritchard and Mr. Morton establish the route. Mr. Bellairs states what the documents can and cannot prove, and I state what House Davenant allowed. Yes. Anthony looked down at the list, then back at her. Lady Henrietta has private letters from Roland. She may use them to make him appear solely responsible. Then we distinguish explanation from authority. His desperation may explain the sale. It doesn't authorize fraud, sabotage, or danger. You will speak first. I will. The agreement settled between them, witnessed and clear. When Bellairs gathered the papers, Anthony extended his hand toward Ismay. It was not the hidden comfort of a railway carriage or the private tenderness of a York inn. Everyone in the room could see it. He offered no claim, only partnership. Ismay placed her hand in his. She did not release it when Bellairs looked up. She kept it as they crossed the map room together and entered the final planning chamber. Anthony's fingers closed around hers with quiet restraint. Neither spoke the words waiting between them. Love could not become another curtain drawn over unfinished truth. At dawn on Thursday, the cracked bell was moved from the goods shed under all three seals, with the constable, railway superintendent, Hobden, and Bellairs witnessing every stage. By mid-morning, it hung secured above the sand floor of Kersey Metal Works, not over any person, but high enough for the fracture and hidden stamp to be seen. Memorial subscribers filled the casting yard. Workers stood along the walls. The county magistrate took his place beside Bellairs's evidence table. Then Lady Henrietta entered in grey silk, carrying a leather case. She opened it before the room and laid a bundle of Lord Roland's private letters beneath the light. The cracked bell hung above the sand floor of Kersey Metal Works. While the room listened to Ismay Tarrant breathe, furnace arches rose behind her, dark for the morning, their brick mouths holding the memory of heat. Workers lined the walls in clean smocks. Memorial subscribers occupied the benches brought in from the yard. Mr. Bellairs stood beside the evidence table with the county magistrate, Mr. Mercer, Mr. Hobden, Mr. Pritchard, and Elias Morton, arranged in the order agreed the night before. Anthony remained several paces behind Ismay. He did not stand over her. He did not speak first. Lady Henrietta sat near the front, in grey silk, one hand resting upon the leather case of Roland's private letters. Septimus stood beside her with a confidence so carefully composed that it looked brittle. Ismay took the sea-glass pebble from her pocket and held it loosely, not hidden, in her left hand. On the morning of the 4th of October, she said, the bell was struck once. I heard the expected note. Beneath it, I heard a slow pulse created by two close frequencies interfering with one another. A few subscribers shifted. She did not perform for them. She demonstrated only what was necessary. Ismay drew one low tone, then introduced the second beside it. The two notes met and separated through the controlled motion of her voice, producing the same uneven beating that had preceded the crack. She stopped after several seconds. The silence that followed belonged to evidence, not applause. Mr. Hobden stepped forward. That sound is consistent with unequal wall thickness, irregular metal density, or both. This bell has both defects. It also contains a filed channel near the sound bow, where the crack began. He pointed without approaching beneath the suspended bronze. The channel weakened a section already compromised by poor casting. Mr. Mercer presented the assay certificates. He explained that the cracked bell contained cheap scrap, excess impurities, and an uneven alloy. Shaving A recovered from the flagstone after the fracture, was consistent with that metal. Shaving B, found beneath the lining of the ceremonial hammer case assigned to Septimus, was also consistent with it. Neither shaving matched the bronze sample taken from the surviving gun trunnion in York. Septimus gave a dismissive breath. Consistent is not identical. In metal work, Mercer replied, a responsible man states the limit of his conclusion. The limits do not rescue you from the rest of the chain. A murmur passed through the workers. Anthony moved forward then, carrying the sealed copy of Rowland's authorization. Bellairs opened the packet under witness and handed him the document. Anthony looked once at Ismay. She gave no reassurance. He had not asked for it. He faced the room. Before any accusation against Mr. Kersey is completed, House Davenant's part must be stated. Lady Henrietta rose. Anthony, you needn't dishonor your brother to satisfy a public appetite. I am not satisfying appetite. I am correcting concealment. He read Rowland's authorization aloud. The dead man's words entered the casting yard without music or polish. Lord Rowland Davenant had empowered Septimus to sell the donated gun bronze, use the proceeds to meet private gambling obligations, and replace the metal later without revealing the substitution. Anthony lowered the paper. My brother acted dishonorably from fear and debt. He accepted a gift made in trust, then permitted its secret sale. House Davenant allowed affection to become mythology. I allowed it. I will not do so again. Lady Henrietta opened her leather case and drew out Rowland's private letters. He was desperate, she said. He believed exposure would destroy the regiment's memory of him. These letters prove he begged Septimus to protect the family. They prove he was ashamed, Ismay said. They don't authorize forged delivery papers, a defective bell, a hidden maker's mark, a filed channel, or an attempt to send evidence into a furnace. Lady Henrietta turned on her. You enjoy this authority, don't you? A former singer lecturing a duke's family before tradesmen. Ismay's hand remained open around the sea glass. Desperation explains an act. It doesn't transform the act into virtue. And truth doesn't become vulgar because workers hear it. One of the older foundrymen lowered his head, not in submission, but agreement. Bellairs began the documentary chain. The decommissioned field gun had been lawfully purchased and donated by Rowland's former regiment. Mr. Pritchard identified the railway ledger entry showing that it arrived intact in York. He then identified Septimus's signed diversion order, the sale of most of the bronze to a locomotive-bearing manufacturer, and the unpaid carriage record that preserved one trunnion section in the bonded warehouse. Elias Morton swore that Septimus's shipping man had presented the crest-marked order and later offered him false employment to prevent his affidavit. Hobden confirmed that no memorial bell had left his yard. The false Weybridge ticket used his company's name, but not his clerk's notation. The Kersey-affiliated stamp had been concealed beneath black paint on the substitute bell. Mercer confirmed that the bell could not contain the full donated bronze. Bellairs then placed the unauthorized recasting order and false Leeds destination label before the magistrate. The wagon was marked for the Kersey private spur, Mr. Pritchard said, not Leeds. Septimus stepped away from his mother. Rowland authorized the sale. He wanted the matter concealed. Every commercial decision followed from his instruction. Bellairs turned toward him. Lord Rowland authorized the sale of bronze and the purchase of replacement material. He did not authorize you to forge Hobden's delivery. He did not authorize you to overstate the substitute bell's weight. He did not authorize you to remove the maker's mark. He did not authorize you to weaken the sound bow. He did not authorize you to endanger the public. The groove was insignificant. Hobden's eyes narrowed. You called it shallow at Haldon East before its depth had been disclosed. Septimus looked toward Lady Henrietta. Her composure finally broke. I knew the bronze had been substituted, she said. I knew the freight inquiry had to be stopped. Roland's reputation belonged to the family, not to parish gossip, but I didn't order the filing. You circulated Miss Tarrant's history to discredit the first witness, Anthony said. You suppressed questions about the siding. You helped protect the deception after the bell cracked. Lady Henrietta lifted her chin. I protected your brother. No, you protected a version of him that required everyone living to bear the cost. The magistrate consulted Bellairs in a low voice, then addressed the room. Formal affidavits would be taken immediately. The documents, shavings, assay certificates, removal order, and bell would pass into secured evidentiary custody. On the sworn statements already presented, the proper warrant process would issue against Septimus Kersey. The local constable moved beside him. There was no spectacle in the restraint, only the end of borrowed authority. Anthony faced the subscribers and workers. As Duke of Haldon, I remove Lady Henrietta Kersey and Mr. Septimus Kersey from every davenant, trust, committee, contract, and industrial appointment within my power. Kersey Company assets tied to this fraud will answer restitution before 1 shilling is spent upon a new memorial. He then turned toward Ismay, but did not summon her to his side. Miss Tarrant's warning prevented a greater disaster at the dedication. Her past as a professional singer neither created the defect nor diminished the truth she heard. Her name is cleared by evidence, not by my favor. No applause followed. Ismay was grateful for that. Workers looked at her without mockery. Subscribers who had circulated the old review lowered their eyes. Lady Henrietta was escorted from the yard under no physical restraint, but without the deference that had once opened every door. Septimus left, with the constable and magistrate's clerk. By late afternoon, the casting yard had emptied. The cracked bell remained secured for legal transfer. Outside, rain had stopped, and pale light entered beneath the cooling arch. Anthony found Ismay standing there with the sea glass still in her palm. He kept several feet between them. I meant what I said, he told her, about your name, about the memorial, about all of it. I know. There is something else I have waited to say, because I had no right to place it beside unfinished truth. Ismay's heartbeat changed, but she did not look away. Anthony stepped closer. I love you, Ismay. I loved your voice before I understood that loving it meant allowing it to say what wounded me. She felt the words move through every guarded place she had kept hidden since the stage, since her mother's death, since the first wrong note beneath the bell. I love you, Anthony, she said, not because you stood above the truth, but because at last you stood inside it. His composure gave way to quiet wonder. May I kiss you? Yes. She placed one hand against his coat and closed the distance herself. His mouth met hers gently, with restraint that did not lessen feeling. The kiss was warm, deliberate, and entirely chosen. When they parted, he rested his forehead briefly against hers, then stepped back before tenderness could become assumption. May I court you openly, he asked. After the affidavits are complete, after the restitution begins, without using marriage to conclude the inquiry. Ismay smiled. Then yes, you may court me. Above them, the cracked bell remained silent. For the first time, its silence no longer felt like failure. Whit Sunday came to Lindenshaw with clear bells from neighbouring parishes and sunlight resting over the unfinished pale stone of St. Cuthbert's Tower. It was Sunday, the 5th June 1870, more than 7 months after the cracked memorial bell had been taken from Kersey Metalworks into secured evidentiary custody, and 8 days after Ismay Tarrant had entered the church as a bride and left it as her Grace, the Duchess of Haldon. The village had not been asked to forget what happened in October. Anthony had refused every proposal that turned the dedication into a celebration of House Davenant's generosity. The printed order of service named the subscribers, the foundry workers, the railway witnesses, the regiment that had donated the decommissioned gun, and the parishioner whose warning prevented the failed bell from being struck before a full dedication crowd. It also included the new inscription. Lord Roland Davenant was remembered for courage in service, for human failure under debt and fear, and for restitution made in his name by those who survived him. Nothing on the bronze called him flawless, nothing called dishonor virtue. The legal consequences had taken months. Septimus Kersey had been convicted of fraud, falsification of commercial records, malicious damage, and reckless endangerment. The sentence removed him from every position through which he had once borrowed dignity, and the company assets connected to the scheme had been applied first to restitution. Lady Henrietta had not been imprisoned because the evidence did not establish that she ordered the filing or personally forged the documents. Her concealment, intimidation, and suppression of inquiry were public, however. Her Davenant patronages and contracts were gone. She lived quietly with distant relations, away from Lindenshaw, where invitations no longer arrived merely because she expected them. The cracked substitute bell remained preserved under court and parish authority. Its fracture, hidden stamp, and filed channel had not been polished away. It had never been repaired, melted, or made to pretend it was something else. The bell now waiting in the completed tower was entirely separate. Mr. Hobden had cast it from the surviving gun bronze recovered in York, metal repurchased from the locomotive-bearing manufacturer, and new clean bell metal entered openly in the foundry records. It had cooled, been tuned, inspected, transported by heavy wagon, and raised only after months of witnessed work. Ismay stood before the parish choir beneath the tower arch, dressed in dove-grey silk rather than ceremonial white, a narrow silver wedding band beneath her glove. Marriage had changed her title, not her right to work. The settlement drawn by Mr. Bellairs protected her earnings, her professional decisions, and the regional choral program she now directed. Anthony had offered to endow it. Ismay had accepted only after the governing terms prevented any duke, husband, committee, or donor from changing its music or dismissing its teachers without recorded cause. Their courtship had unfolded in the same spirit. There had been no hurried wedding to convert gratitude into romance. For more than 6 months they had walked, written argued, attended hearings, visited Hobden's yard, and learned the less dramatic disciplines of trust. Anthony had proposed in March beside the river, without witnesses except Mrs. Clovelly at a proper distance. He had offered no estate, title, or promise of protection as the reason she should accept him. He had asked whether she could imagine a life in which they continued to disagree honestly and return to one another without punishment. Ismay had accepted because he asked for her life, not her silence. Their wedding on Saturday the 28th May had been quiet, witnessed by those who had helped preserve the truth rather than by the society that had once demanded a spectacle. Now every seat in St. Cuthbert's was filled. Foundry workers stood beside landowners. Railway clerks shared a pew with memorial subscribers who had once circulated the hostile review of Miss May Tarrant. Mr. Pritchard sat near Elias Morton and his family. Mr. Hobden waited beside the bell rope with 2 trained ringers. Mrs. Cloverley occupied the front pew and dabbed her eyes before anything had begun. Anthony stood near the chancel in a dark morning coat. He did not signal the bell. He waited for Ismay. The choir's opening response rose without a solo voice. Ismay had chosen a setting in which the melody passed from altos to tenors, then to the clear upper line of the younger singers before returning to the whole body. No singer became the memorial. No patron's name entered the text. When the final chord settled, she lowered her hands and allowed the silence to remain. Anthony looked toward her. Months earlier, he would have interpreted waiting as failure of command. Now he waited without embarrassment. Ismay met his eyes and gave one small nod. Only then did he turn to Hobden. The founder passed the signal to the ringer. The rope descended. The first strike moved through the tower, over the church roof, and across the fields beyond Lindenshaw. Ismay listened for the slow struggle beneath the note. It did not come. The fundamental opened full and steady, followed by overtones that separated cleanly and faded in their proper order. The new bell did not sound perfect because perfection had become a word she distrusted. It sounded honest. A second measured strike followed. Then a third. No one applauded. The crowd remained still until the last vibration had passed beyond hearing. Ismay felt Anthony's gaze before he approached. He stopped at the distance demanded by the ceremony and said quietly, "Was it true?" "Yes." His breath left him. "Thank God. And Mr. Hobden." A smile reached his eyes. "I'm learning to divide credit correctly." After the service, parishioners gathered in the churchyard, but neither Anthony nor Ismay remained at the center of congratulations. The workers were thanked. The choir children were fed. The subscribers examined the foundry ledger that splayed under glass. Near late afternoon, husband and wife slipped away along the Riversidspahata below the old abbey ruins. Spring growth softened the broken arches, and the river moved bright beneath the sun. Ismay carried no program, no witness card, and no music. The blue-green sea-glass pebble rested in her ungloved hand. Anthony noticed it when they reached the stone parapet above the water. "You held that before the first bell cracked," he said. "I held it before every stage entrance I feared." She placed the pebble on the sun-warmed stone. Its cloudy center caught the light, while its worn edges cast a small green shadow. Anthony looked from the glass to her face. "You don't need it now. I may need it again." She smiled. "Courage isn't a possession one acquires permanently." "Then why leave it there?" "I'm not leaving it. I'm letting it be seen." The answer moved something tender through his expression. He offered his hand, palm open, as hers had been on the train beyond Selby. Ismay placed her fingers in his. "I love you," he said, with no audience to hear him and no apology hidden inside the words. "I love you too." She drew him closer. This time she initiated the kiss, rising slightly to meet him beneath the weathered abbey wall. Anthony received the gesture with a quiet smile against her mouth, then kissed her back with the familiar restraint that never made tenderness feel small. When they parted, their hands remained joined. From St. Cuthbert's, the bell sounded for evening prayer. The note crossed the river without faltering. Ismay did not reach for the sea glass. It lay open upon the parapet, warmed by the last light. no longer clenched in fear while the bell that needed no lie rang over Lindenshaw.